how the heck did Finland find a solution to homelessness?
Yeah, what's that? They need this in Philadelphia.
Oh, LA.
It's like, as Americans, we're not in the U.S. anymore. Tyler over here was in the U.S. If you watch some of our other ones, he's in the U.S. a decent amount the last year. But it's always interesting that like all people know about the U.S. nowadays is the homelessness, and we're not from super big cities, so we don't see it that much. But it seems like it's gotten really, really bad.
I mean, it's like, I remember before it was 600,000 people, but I feel like it's pushing to 1 million homeless people in the U.S. now.
Every like decent sized city has it.
It's pretty crazy. And we're from the suburbs, so we don't see many. Like maybe there'd be like one or two in one of the 5 towns around us, but pretty interesting that that's such a huge issue in America. And Finland found the solution.
And we're from Minnesota too, where it gets too cold in the dang winter for there to even be homeless people out in the streets. I think they're probably all going to LA or something, going to a different place.
They got some shelters so they don't freeze to death on the streets, but yeah, it's interesting. But let's talk about Finland. Let's jump in. Here we go.
Homelessness is often considered a problem that doesn't have a solution. But there is one country that may have found...
Can this guy really be homeless with that backpack?
I mean, it's Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is here to force, I don't know, and an IKEA bag. That's like a luxury here in the Philippines.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, Finland has developed a unique strategy for getting homeless people off the streets and back into the society,
them in
and it
job
aims to
programs and giving
completely
them affordable
eradicate
housing?
homelessness by 2027. And although Japan still has technically the lowest homelessness rate, the Japanese success is actually quite questionable, while Finland has been praised again and again for its results. So how did Finland manage to do it? And why aren't we just doing the same thing everywhere else? This is how Finland solved homelessness. But first, a quick message. If you like what I do, explaining how the world works by going
dark
beyond
side
the
of
headlines
Italy?
and challenging what we think we know about it, do consider
Putin?
becoming a
Oh.
supporter on my Patreon. For just $1.50, you will help me to make more and better videos, and you'll get bonus content, early access, and you'll get to
that
vote
out
on
if you
topics
want
I should
We'll
cover
link
next.
his video in
Just
the
go to
description.
patreon.com/explainedwithdom to check it out. And now back to the video. Finland is famously the only country in the European Union where numbers of homeless people are actually significantly decreasing, and have been for several decades. And it's not like other European countries are not trying. They all have shelters, organizations giving out aid, and dedicated national strategies. But most of
What's
them,
different
including the
in
UK, Germany, or France,
is it?
still see their numbers going up rather than going down. So what is Finland doing differently? Well, as they say, if you want average results, do the same thing as everyone else. And if you want unique results, you have to use unique
Like the
methods as
statue.
Yeah, like a baby alien peeing.
That's pretty cool.
well. And so the Finns have turned the traditional
Well, it's not
approach
like
to
some
homelessness
historical
on
figure.
its head and
Maybe.
committed to a radical strategy that became known as housing first. Basically, there is usually a reason why someone ends up homeless, whether it's because of mental illness, drug addiction, because they lost their job, or something else. But the idea behind how most countries approach homelessness is that the person living on the street should start by sorting out those problems first, while living in a shelter. And only after that, they can get access to permanent housing. This has been called the staircase approach, because the homeless person is basically expected to gradually move up through different levels. They're
Interesting.
expected to stop taking drugs, undergo mental health treatments, and if they make progress, they can move on, with the permanent housing as a final reward. But
So we watched a video kind of about Finnish prisons, and it kind of shows like this is kind of here about, it's similar to the Finnish prisons where it's the rehabilitation is really a big theme. Like, oh, this person's in a bad situation or a bad state, they can be better or something like that.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about just, I don't know, it seems like in the US it's either these people, we gave them a chance and they didn't go up this ladder, so screw them.
Mhm.
Throw them back on the street where they
Yeah.
belong.
They don't get many chances for
No.
sure. And yeah.
So it's interesting. And Finland is obviously a different approach.
But the problem is that this approach is not actually very effective. Quitting drugs or managing serious mental health issues is already difficult when you have a home, and it's basically impossible when you're homeless. In other words, we expect people living on the street to do what many regular people are not able to, and so it's not surprising that most homeless people get stuck on one level of the staircase, as they fail to complete the tasks to move on, and eventually they relapse, get evicted, and go back to the street. So Finland, seeing that the traditional approach was not very effective, decided to turn this on its head and try out something very different. Rather than thinking of housing as a reward for successfully integrating into the society, Finland based its approach on the idea that with a permanent home from the beginning, solving your own problems becomes much easier. And so the state started providing permanent housing in the form.
So you're saying we have been 3 minutes in this video, and the way that Finland solved homelessness was giving people homes?
Oh my gosh. Almost like it's in the name.
Oh, interesting.
Dang. We don't even have to watch the video. The first thing I said is affordable housing.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you guys for watching.
Of small individual apartments, not as the final reward, but at the very beginning, and to basically any homeless person who asks for it, and without strict conditions. People living in the housing provided by the state are not required to give up drugs or go to a treatment, and they're not evicted if they relapse. They are, however, required to pay a small rent, which means they need to have an income. And they have a very strong support system which they need to take part in. In most cases, the housing is provided in centers with around 100 homeless people living in small individual apartments that are looked after by a team of around 20 on-site social workers. And they provide support with everything from bureaucracy, job hunting, and getting access to addiction or mental health treatments.
This
And
is
they
interesting because in the United States, if somebody proposed a program like this, people would be like, they're just going to live there for free and they're going to take our tax money and they're going to live free and be freeloaders, blah, blah, blah. Seems like people have a different approach. Like they approach that by bettering these people's lives and getting them off the street, it improves everybody's lives.
Yeah, it's like maybe we could just cut down on the defense budget a little bit, you know?
Yeah, maybe.
It is interesting too. Like, there's a lot of other issues that need to be addressed in the U.S. first if they wanted to do something like this, because they had like the projects and like like that type of stuff where it's like it was sort of affordable housing, but there's so many other issues with it. They kind of like just thought like, oh, this will solve the problem, but didn't help with anything else, like the schooling and the funding to the neighborhoods. They just like it's very interesting.
That's an interesting thing too, because the projects in another terms were a way for them to segregate minorities to those areas.
Yeah.
So they're like, here, you guys can afford this. Go in there.
Because it just so happened that all the homeless people and the people dealing with the issues were also the people who were the minorities in those areas that they also already pushed into those areas, and now they can push them into a smaller area.
And then once they get them there, cut the funding. You don't pay for schools. You don't give them anything.
Because now they're in one neighborhood. So
cut them off.
How it works in the U.S. is your neighborhood pays, or like your city, you pay for your school in that region or whatever. So if they're all in the one, in their district, all of their money, if it's less money, means they're worse education.
And it's all gerrymandered so that the rich neighborhoods around them, they don't vote with them.
All that stuff would have to be fixed before the U.S. could even try something like this.
Nah,
They would just put it in a certain area, and then that area would be not the best area to be.
It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Because even if a program did start, if like say there's some politician or group that started something like this, what would happen is they'd have funding to start, and then whenever the next administration comes in, they'd start cutting down the funding. And they'd be like, guys, look at this. It's not even working, even though it doesn't have funding. They're like, just get rid of it. Just get rid of it.
12 years later, one of the presidents is like, why do we even have this project anymore?
Are we ranting about current events?
No.
Nobody's
also keep things from going off the rails. But how it works is one thing, and if it works is another one. So does it? Well, in the mid-1980s, there were around 20,000 homeless people in Finland, and according to national estimates, in 2021, this figure has decreased to just under 4,000. and so it looks like a success. But is it really? The critics
Those
of
are
the
the
Finnish
finished
system
projects
say
right
that
there.
Yeah,
this
my
just
gosh.
hides the problem, and the numbers are artificially decreased by putting everyone in government-paid housing, rather than actually reintegrating them into the society. And that is a legitimate criticism. The results are only possible because of the continuous support paid for by the state. The numbers of those who transition from government housing to living completely independently are quite small, and if you would remove the government support, the homelessness numbers would immediately spike once again. But on the other hand, that's the whole point of the policy. You don't need homeless people to turn into model citizens who are addiction-free and who are completely independent. In the Finnish model, it's already considered a success when you get them off the street and into a controlled, safe environment,
Not the
when they're able
mentality
to
in the
pay a
US.
small rent every month, and when they're slowly, one step at a time, reintegrating back into the society.
people are a
Now,
different species
naturally,
that are
this
below.
costs a lot of money. The Finnish
Nobody's
government
given
spends
up
a
any of
lot
their
of money
hard-earned
on buying
income for them.
apartments and turning them into homeless housing, subsidizing developers who build this housing, heavily subsidizing their
this sounds like
rent, and
communism to
employing
me.
a lot of social workers
Communism,
that work
Joe
with the
Brandon,
homeless.
Kamala Harris,
Kamala.
bad.
That's bad. Look at what he did to the gas prices and the egg prices. This isn't about Finland
And
anymore.
that's not cheap. But even so,
just see nice
according
things
to
in
Finnish
Finland and we're like,
statistics, it actually
US could
financially
never.
pays off. A study of financial costs shows that Finland actually saves 15,000 euros a
Wow, they
year on
save
every
money?
homeless person it houses.
It makes
Even though it
sense.
spends money on housing and social workers, it's still a lot cheaper than to bear the cost of emergency care, policing, justice system, and all
Yeah,
the
it makes
costs that
sense.
come
And
with
those
having
people are
homeless
working
people
now
living on
and
the
paying
street.
taxes.
And
Yeah.
so in the end, it's a model
And-
that kind of works for everyone. It's definitely better
I'll
for
just
the
wait.
homeless people who don't have to live on the street or in often dangerous temporary shelters. It's better for the regular people who don't have to deal with criminality, drug use, and other
Exactly.
issues that come with people living on the street. And it's actually better even for the government that ends up saving money. But if it works in Finland, why aren't we doing it everywhere? And would it be
Agreed.
successful? Well, that's a tricky question. And there are both practical and ideological reasons why Finland is still unique in this approach. First, even if you wanted to, it's not actually that easy to just take what Finland is doing and apply it somewhere else. For example, the basic condition to give away housing is that you need to have enough of it. And since most countries are going through a housing crisis, that's not that easy. One of the reasons
In, I believe it's the city of San Francisco or LA, one of the two, which is two of the cities with the most or the biggest homeless problem. I believe it was like 55,000 vacant homes.
That's so many.
Insane. Let's just
why Finland is able
That's
to
all I
do
need to
it
say.
is because cities in Finland tend to own most of the land, and so they're able to use that to build a lot of social housing units, but that's not common. And so even though this policy is successful in Finland, it can fail in other places. California, for example, has been trying the housing first policy as well for the past 10 years, but it hasn't really seen the same results. And that's
Wonder
because
why.
it lacks
think it's
everything that is
adequately
required
funded?
for this policy to be successful. Unlike Finland, California has incredibly strict development rules and really expensive real estate, which means that building social housing in large quantities is kind of impossible. And even then, housing is just a part of it. In order to replicate how it works in Finland, you also need a really strong social security system, a lot of social workers, and access to healthcare, mental health institutions, and addiction treatments. But California doesn't really have any of that. But even more than for practical reasons, this policy is often rejected on ideological grounds. There is a deep-rooted idea that homeless people should deserve housing, rather than just get it, and that doing so creates a bad precedent. Even though in this case, that's not really what the data and the evidence are telling us. So although Finland has some unique advantages, this model can be applied elsewhere. But in order to be successful, it requires a lot of invested resources, ability to commit for decades rather than for years, and in the end, it needs to be just a part of a wider, well-functioning system of social safety nets that help people from getting off the ground. And so it looks like Finland will probably keep its unique position for a bit longer.
So basically, Finland's got it figured out. I mean, Finland's a very small country, so it's easier to get people to agree to this type of stuff. The U.S. is very large and
Yes.
very angry.
Diverse.
Yeah, people really don't like the idea of thinking that they have to pay more taxes to give it to some person, especially if the person, like, for some reason thinks that Hispanic people are sucking the money out of the country, and then they imagine their money going to like Hispanics or
Yeah.
black people. They'd be like, oh, just interesting.
And then also like another issue that they didn't even mention with like the U.S. is like, who knows how much dang lobbying would go on with like
Unlimited.
that, like how many real estate companies would be like, you're gonna take that land and put up affordable housing. I could build my 6-person apartment unit and charge them each $2,000 a month.
And half of it will be empty.
Yeah.
It's the real estate in the United States is outrageous. It would never be able to pass. No matter how much money the US has to throw at something like this, it would never be allowed.
Real estate in the U.S. is not outrageous at all. That's the easiest way to get rich. You obviously, when you're
Just invest.
when you're 16 years old, you're supposed to buy a property and then rent it out to 6 people. That's how you make money, and that's how you become a millionaire.
Are you a rich guru on YouTube?
Guys, make sure to check out my course. I've been teaching alphas and sigmas out there how to make your bucks.
It's seeing this stuff. We always end up talking about the US more because we see this stuff from Finland and Norway and Denmark and these countries like this, and we're like, wow, the United States is the richest country to ever exist in the history of the world, yet they can't do things like this to help its citizens. They'd rather kill people by not giving them any health care and make as much money as possible and kill people in other countries.
Yeah, and the whole reason we're reacting to these videos is because we're Americans, you know. We gotta
Yeah.
give our perspective. We didn't really talk about the Philippines much. That's our other perspective we would give because we live in the Philippines a decent amount. But here, if you want a quick summary of that, one company owns like almost half the country, and they're building little business districts, slowly pushing the slums, you could call the squatters, into more confined areas, and they're probably just going to slowly push them out, and then it's going to be the same thing as the U.S.
Yeah. That's not good. And since we're not from here in the Philippines, we can live on this like different echelon in the country because we make US dollars. So like we don't have to deal with any of that, which is sad.
It's sad.
It's sad to see.
We say this stuff because we care about the Philippines. We like it here.
And now we're talking about it on a Finland video.
Sorry.
It's just interesting. I mean, you can just see it plain as day. The countries that do the things that work and the countries that refuse to because lobbying, corporate greed, and all the basically legalized bribery that goes on in the governments from these companies.
Lots of stuff going on in the world, and lots that will never change.
Nope.
Peace out, homies.
Thank you, Finland. Very epic.